Hey everyone, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to a Watchman Newscast live stream. My apologies, I'm a few minutes late here. That is, I'm dog sitting, put it that way. My wife and two daughters are at the beach for a few days, just a few days, and I am here with our beloved dog Bear, the ironically named Bear. He's a little guy. He's a Morkie, half Maltese, half Yorkshire Terrier. That equals a Morkie. Only a little dude, but I'm here with Bear, my good buddy, and had to let him out and take care of some stuff before I jumped on with you. And God willing, he won't start barking as we're doing the newscast, but he's a great little guy. Great to be with you. We have a lot of great guys and gals with us today for the live stream. Let's get the chat going here. As always, have your questions ready, folks. We will have the questions will be coming to me from our producer, Daniel. Our trusty producer, Daniel, will be getting them to me. So good stuff here. I'm just trying to see the chat for myself on the sidebar. Can't see it right now, but I'll mess around with that. Okay. We already have a few hundred people with us, logging on more and more, so this is great. We want to get right into it today. I hope everyone's having a great August. It's hard to believe. Summer almost done. I'm sad to say it's August 11th. I'm holding on for dear life. I love the summertime, love the warm weather, of course, and I know you all do too, I'm sure. But lots happening in the world, lots happening in the world's most volatile, most strategic region, the Middle East. We've got a lot to talk about today. A lot of it centers on, surprise, surprise, Iran in particular. New information we're getting that you need to know, folks, about Iran's radical new government. We now have some key cabinet posts in the government of new Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi being filled, and you're going to want to hear about this, or maybe you won't, because it's not very encouraging news, to say the least. He's really stacking the deck with some true hardcore radicals. We also want to talk about CIA Director, U.S. CIA Director William Burns. He is in Israel right now. Sorry, just getting the screen straight. I think we're good to go. CIA Director Burns in Israel, meeting with top Israeli officials. And what is on the top of their agenda? You guessed it, the Iranian regime, and in particular, I'm sure, the Iranian nuclear threat and the attempts by the West, the Biden White House, and Europe to revive that disastrous Iran nuclear deal, which may be, now that Raisi is in office, DOA, dead on arrival. We'll get into that as well. Also, hard to believe, but I believe it was August 13th last year. Today's August 11th, August 13th last year, that the Abraham Accords were announced. The announcement came down that Israel had reached peace agreements with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. We have some important developments on that front as well. Now, the Accords were officially signed on September 15th, 2020 at the White House. I was honored to be there. I had a front row seat at the White House. President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the leaders or top officials from the UAE and Bahrain signed the Abraham Accords at the White House, but it was announced a month before the signing ceremony, and that's hard to believe, but we are marking that right now. We have several hundred people with us right now. This is great. Welcome, everyone. Real quick, we're going to dig into Iran. I want to see if I can get this chat going. It's going, but I can't see it right now, but Daniel can, our producer. Remember, bring your questions, and I will answer them if they're good, and I'm sure they will be. During the latter half of our live stream, we always do a Q&A here on the Watchman Newscast live stream. I also, when we wrap up some of our geopolitical talk, I would love to share a testimony story with you, I guess, so you get to know me a little bit more personally, but one of these, I guess you would say, milestones or guideposts along my walk with the Lord throughout my life. So I want to share a good one with you that I know will encourage you for sure, especially in the times we are living in. We all need some encouragement, right? Especially with the subject matter we're about to dive into. Ebrahim Raisi, the new Iranian president, obviously inaugurated 6 days ago, last Thursday. He is now the second most powerful man in Iran behind the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Now, Raisi, as we've discussed on the newscast several times over the past few weeks, is very close. He is an acolyte of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and he is seen by many as the probable successor to the current Ayatollah, who I believe is 82 years old and who has been in poor health over the years. There have been rumors for really the past decade that Ayatollah Khamenei may have cancer, may have some kind of ailment critical ailment. We're not sure about that. We do know he's certainly getting up there in years, and Raisi seems to be Khamenei's hand-picked successor. So he's getting his feet wet, so to speak, in the role of the presidency, where, look, remember, the supreme leader has the ultimate power and authority inside Iran, but Raisi will be very influential. Number one, because he's so close to the supreme leader, unlike past Iranian presidents. But secondly, because he is in lockstep ideologically with Khamenei and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, who answer directly to the supreme leader and who are the real power brokers in Iran, folks. Remember that. The IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, they have their hand in everything from the Iranian economy, the nuclear program, the terror activities overseas. Qasem Soleimani, the not so dearly departed Iranian terror master, was a integral figure in the Revolutionary Guards Corps. They almost operate their own military, adjacent, I guess you would say, to Iran's official state military. So the IRGC, I would compare them in a sense to the Nazi SS, the Gestapo, the SS, this elite vanguard within the Iranian regime, similar to the SS within that Nazi, that wicked Nazi regime. We have a similar thing playing out today in 2021 with the IRGC. Raisi's close to them, and he's close to the supreme leader. And most importantly, there is no daylight, ladies and gentlemen, between Raisi's worldview and Ayatollah Khamenei's worldview and the views of the IRGC. None. If you're looking for a moderate, a relative so-called moderate in the Iranian regime today, good luck, because you are not going to find it. You know, Western diplomats and the mainstream media in the West loved to paint Hassan Rouhani, the outgoing Iranian president, as a moderate voice. Meanwhile, Rouhani was still a advocate of wiping Israel off the map, still referred to America as the Great Satan, agreed with most of the Iranian regime's agenda, just maybe had a different way of going about it. Maybe he gave the moderate veneer in public, whereas Raisi and these other folks now, they're not putting on any illusions that they're moderate. Rouhani had a little act going on, he and Javad Zarif, the Iranian foreign minister, that they were moderate. We could reason with these guys. Hey, they're reasonable chaps. Well, that wasn't the case, but they tried to give off that moderate veneer to the naive Western diplomats and Western mainstream media. And guess what? They succeeded to the point where the Iran nuclear deal was signed in 2015. But now that's all out the window. And by the way, key point here. When you hear Hassan Rouhani, the former Iranian president, referred to as a moderate, it's all relative. Oh, he's moderate, I suppose, compared to Ayatollah Khamenei or the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps. I would frame it like this. He's a tad bit less radical. Why don't we say that? Instead of saying he's a relative moderate, let's say he's a bit less radical and extremist, but still very much radical and extremist in his worldview and his ideology. That said, Raisi kicked things off last week when he was inaugurated with what I called on the newscast a few days ago, a terror summit. That was on Monday's newscast, August 9th. You can check it out here in our archives. While you're there, if you have not subscribed, please be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time we post a new video, a new live stream. Lots going on that you need to know about. And we want to be your one-stop shop for all things Middle East and why it matters to you. This terror summit involved Raisi meeting with, talk about a rogues gallery, leaders from Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Iraqi Shia militias, which, as we know, are funded, financed, armed by the Iranian regime as well. Raisi, in basically his first act as president, met with all of them late last week after he was inaugurated. And who knows what was discussed in this terror summit? I'm sure Israel and the United States, the little Satan and the great Satan, in their view, were at the top of the list and how to confront. Because, folks, make no mistake about it, this new Iranian government, and it's not new in a sense that the supreme leader, remains in place. He's been there for 30 years. He is the main shot caller in that regime, the main power broker. But the cabinet, the president and his cabinet have changed. At the end of the day, everything goes through Khamenei, but Raisi is Khamenei's guy, whereas Rouhani really wasn't. So it's a new day, again, lockstep. And Raisi, after that terror summit, has begun forming his new cabinet, the new Iranian government. I have some names for you here and some track records here for you in terms of who he is picking. I'm just glancing down at my phone, pardon me. Because the Times of Israel, timesofisrael.com, has a very informative piece about this today, laying out who is in this new Iranian cabinet, hand-selected by Raisi, who was hand-selected by the Ayatollah. We talked about this on the newscast on Monday as well. The new Iranian vice president, Raisi's right-hand man, like Raisi, is sanctioned by the United States. Isn't that something? A head of state is actually under U.S. sanctions. Gives you an idea of what we're facing right now with the Iranian regime. And yet, at that inauguration ceremony last Thursday, not only were Hamas, Hezbollah, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad present, so was a top official from the European Union. Imagine that. His name is Enrique Mora. He is the EU's point man for the Iran nuclear deal and negotiating with the Iranian regime. He was there in the second row, right behind Hamas, Hezbollah, and Islamic Jihad. How sad and pathetic. Not only that, we had various European leaders offering Raisi greetings and congratulations on ascending to the presidency. Talk about moral relativism in Europe right now, and just a need for a strong leader there, a strong leader with moral fiber and moral backbone in Western Europe right now. It is sorely needed, because that was a disgrace. I don't use that word lightly, to have a European representative present at the inauguration of a man who's not only sanctioned by the United States for his extreme activities and vicious activities, but has been called the Butcher of Tehran for his crackdown, his personal crackdowns as a member of Iran's judiciary. He helped direct the crackdowns on Iranian political prisoners and dissidents in the late 1980s, in particular, tortured, executed. He was intimately involved in that, was Raisi, and that's why he's sanctioned by the U.S. And yet Europe is rolling out the red carpet for this guy. Pretty troubling, to say the least, and troubling also that, as I mentioned, Raisi's handpicked vice president also is on the U.S. sanctions list, another guy who's close to the supreme leader as well. Again, we talked about that on the Monday newscast. You can check it out in our archives. If you're just joining us, welcome here. We are live here on the Watchman Newscast. We've got a lot to discuss in terms of the Iranian regime, the new government in Iran, people you don't know about yet. You know about Ebrahim Raisi. You know about the vice president because we talked about him on Monday's newscast. But there are some new cabinet members that Raisi has hand-selected, and it is an ominous sign for the world, to say the least. Here they are. We got the vice president down. Here's some more names for you that you need to know. I love the headline here in the Times of Israel. Iran's Raisi taps minister wanted for role in Buenos Aires Jewish Center bombing. Now, the Buenos Aires Jewish Center bombing occurred in 1994 in Argentina, carried out by Iran. They attacked a Jewish cultural or community center there in the Argentine capital. I believe dozens, if not a few hundred people were killed. And Raisi, it looks like, has nominated to his cabinets a minister who was involved in that, the Interior Ministry. The Interior Minister, I'm just reading here, Hossein Amir Abdullahian. That is quite a name. He will be foreign minister of Iran, and he is known as a hardliner who served under Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Remember him, the notorious Holocaust denier who served as Iran's president until 2012, 2013. And this new foreign minister is, quote, an avowed anti-Westerner believed to have close relations with the Hezbollah terror group in Lebanon, as well as Iran's Revolutionary Guards force. So there's Iran's new foreign minister. You won't have the smiling Javad Zarif meeting with John Kerry and EU representatives anymore. Oh, no. That's the new foreign minister. Hezbollah, Revolutionary Guards, an anti-Western radical who worked under Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Okay, that's the foreign minister Raisi has selected. Now, that interior minister I mentioned, General Ahmad Vahidi, he's been blacklisted by the U.S. as well in 2010. These are the worst of the worst. They're now making up Iran's government. The extreme of extreme. He was the head of the Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force, which is in charge of its terror operations around the world. I mentioned Qasem Soleimani. He also once led the Quds Force before a U.S. airstrike eliminated him. And there is an Interpol, the International Police Interpol, red notice out for this Ahmed Vahidi, the new interior minister, for his role in that 1994 bombing in Argentina of a Jewish cultural center, again, that killed 85 people actually and wounded hundreds of people. So there you go. That's three of the top cabinet members: the vice president, U.S. sanctions list, the interior minister behind or intimately involved in a notorious terror attack about 27 years ago, also on a U.S. blacklist, the foreign minister, Hezbollah, Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps connections. There you have it, folks. That's part of Iran's new cabinet. Call me crazy, but this doesn't seem like the kind of government that's going to be conciliatory, be open to negotiations, and be open to compromise in Vienna as part of this Iran nuclear talks, these ongoing Iran nuclear talks, which have been stalled. They stalled, I believe, in June. They've been on hold for several weeks now in anticipation of, okay, a new Iranian government is coming in, a new Iranian president, Ebrahim Raisi. So we'll put the talks on hold. Now, the United States was having indirect talks with Iranian officials in Vienna. The Europeans were the go-between between Iran and the United States. The talks are on hold. Raisi has not said definitively that it's done, that there is no shot at all that Iran will pursue these nuclear talks and a nuclear agreement. He has not said that. Iran may very well come back to the table, but folks, they believe now that they have all the leverage. And if they come back to the table with this Raisi-led government, with a host of radicals, some of whom I just laid out for you, you can bet that their terms will be absolutely uncompromising. Even before Raisi, Iran was demanding that all sanctions be dropped, not just some U.S. sanctions, all U.S. sanctions. And you can bet that that will continue to be the demand. Who knows what else they will ask for? And you can bet that Iran's sponsorship of international and regional terror, its ballistic missile program, will not be on the table. The Iranian regime's not going to put that out there and say, hey, okay, we may negotiate with you over that. No, this will be the hardline stance of all hardline stance. No compromise if it goes back to Vienna with these talks. What does that mean short term and long term? It means that the Iran nuclear deal, this revived version that the U.S. and Europe are trying desperately to cobble together, and pathetically, I might say, pathetically, by the way, may fall apart. Now, a few months ago, before Raisi was elected, we talked about this on the newscast. I said, hey, this thing's probably going to happen. The Biden White House, from the moment he stepped into the Oval Office, he said, we want to revive the Iran nuclear deal. They've been hell-bent on reviving that disastrous deal, one of the biggest blunders in American foreign policy history, at the very, very top. A disastrous, dangerous deal that where the ballistic missiles, the terror sponsorship of Hamas, Hezbollah, and others was not even part of that Iran deal. Can you imagine? And when it comes to deal making, I'm not a huge businessman deal maker, but I do know this about it. When it comes to a deal, both sides should get something and walk away relatively satisfied. Can anyone watching right now name one thing that the United States or the West gained from the Iran nuclear deal in 2015? I can tell you what Iran gained. Billions of dollars in sanctions relief, which in turn helped Hezbollah and Hamas and various other terror groups in the region gain as well. Iranian funding and Iranian weaponry. So there's one-sided deals, and then there's one-sided deals. The 2015 Iran deal may take the cake in that regard, and that's why, frankly, I don't want to see a revived version of that deal. I don't think anyone watching does, and it may fall apart now, which is a good thing on one hand, but on the other hand, the reason it's falling apart is that Iran has become even more radical and even more aggressive. So we thought that it would go down because of Biden's desire to get into it, but the election of Raisi, folks, was a major game changer, without a doubt. Talk about prophetic chess pieces moving on the board. I mean, now you have an Iranian government that this is the most, and this is saying something, this may very well be the most radical Iranian government we've seen since the dawn of the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And that's a big statement. And that is, I believe, an accurate statement. They are at the top in terms of the most radical regimes that Iran has rolled out there over the past 42 years. What does that mean? Again, short term, long term. Well, we've said here in the newscast that if that Iran nuclear deal is indeed reborn from the depths of hell, that deal is reborn, that guarantees war. Why do I say that? You might say, look, it's a deal. It's a good thing. No, because in that Iran deal, there is something called the sunset clause. What does that mean? When the sun sets on the deal, when it ends, say 5 years from now, the original deal was a 10-year deal. If the deal ends after 10 years, then what? What happens then? When the sun sets, Iran can do whatever it wants. So the sunset clause means once the deal's over, okay, Iran for 5 years, 10 years, they can bide their time and wait very patiently. Look, they're nothing if not patient, the Iranian regime. By the way, the game of chess was invented in Persia, ancient Iran. They're master chess players, master negotiators, wheelers and dealers is this regime. And the patience is obvious. This has been a slow rolling crisis for about 30 years now. This Iranian nuclear crisis, they can certainly wait another 10 years until the deal rolls out to break out and get the bomb and have the bomb. Look, Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz said just a few days ago that he believes Iran could be 10 weeks away from breaking out and having nuclear weapons. They're enriching uranium at record levels for them as they drive for the bomb. It's pretty clear what they want to do. So the guarantee is that if you're the guarantee of war, I should say, if you're in Israel's shoes, you say, okay, there's this deal for 5 years, 10 years, whatever. What happens when the deal's over? Exactly. That's a question to ask, right? Because what the deal does is it kicks the can down the road. That's all it does. It just kicks the can down the road for a few years, the Iranian nuclear problem. And then the deal ends, the sun sets, and it's still there. And they're still this close to having the bomb. So short term, it's a problem. There's your long-term problem down the line when the deal ends. In the short term, so that guarantees war because eventually Israel's going to have to act, and they're going to act. Israel will not allow Iran to have the bomb. No matter who the government is in Jerusalem, they're not going to let the Iranian regime, a regime devoted to Israel's destruction, acquire the weapons that would enable Iran to do exactly that. So that let's lay that on the table right now. Israel's not going to allow Iran to go nuclear. Could it be down the road more if the nuclear deal is signed, or would it be more short term? Say now, which looks and reports are that U.S. officials are getting antsy and concerned, and it looks like this whole thing may just fall apart. That now that Raisi and this radical government are in there, these nuclear talks in Vienna may just unravel, and we may be back at square one. And when that happens, that may move up conflict even sooner, folks, because perhaps in that case, if Iran is indeed 10 weeks out from having the bomb, perhaps under Raisi, Khamenei, this regime, Iran says enough is enough. We're through negotiating with the great Satan. We're walking away from the negotiating table, and we're breaking out. Within a few weeks, we will have the bomb. So you have two scenarios, neither of them end in peace in our time, as many of the appeasers in the West would like to see with the Iranian regime. Everyone wants peace. unfortunately, in the form of the Iranian regime, not the Iranian people who are suffering under the jackboot of this regime for the past 42 years, but in the form of the Iranian regime, you don't have peacemakers, you don't have compromisers, you don't have people who truly have the best interest of their country, the region, and the world at heart. You're dealing with evil men. Yes, evil in 2021, in these morally relative times, it is still very black and white when it comes to good and evil. That's called a biblical worldview. And the Iranian regime, people like Raisi and Khamenei, are evil. And what they want to do to you, your kids, your grandkids, is evil as well. So we call it how we see it here at the Watchman Newscast. And by the way, there was an interesting report today, also in the Times of Israel, that Israeli intelligence, I mentioned that the U.S. CIA Director William Burns is visiting Israel this week. Reports, I believe it was on Israel's Channel 12 TV network in Israel, that the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service, presented CIA Director William Burns with their assessment of Ebrahim Raisi, the new Iranian president. And I have some direct quotes here. Basically, they said that he, in this report, reportedly, they told Burns that he is a madman. He gleefully is a torturer and persecutor and a very bad guy and unhinged mentally. Reportedly, this is the report that was given to William Burns by Israeli intelligence, according to an Israeli TV network. Is it accurate? Who knows? If it is, I would not be surprised, put it that way, based on what we've seen in the track record. When your nickname is the Butcher of Tehran, that seems like it's got a pretty good chance of being an accurate description, what was described there on Israel's Channel 12. That's what you're dealing with right now. And that's why I say this is the most radical government that Iran quite possibly has ever had in 42 years since that Iranian revolution kicked off. So that is the state of play right now. If the Iran nuclear deal happens, you're going to have war, because Israel's going to say, okay, this deal is in place for 5-10 years, and Iran's going to get billions of dollars in sanctions relief, and they're going to use that to fund all their terror proxies, that ring of fire that surrounds Israel right now. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza to the south, the Houthis to the south in Yemen, Hezbollah to the north in Lebanon and Syria, Iraqi Shia militias, various radical forces in Syria, all surrounding Israel with that ring of fire, armed to the teeth with rockets, missiles, and attack drones. Israel says, okay, Iran's going to have billions of dollars in sanctions relief from the West in its coffers that it is going to share with its proxies. Not only that, Israel's going to say, okay, that's bad enough. And it also doesn't address their ballistic missile program. And what happens when the deal's up and they break out if they're only 10 weeks away? So that guarantees war if you do have a deal. The other alternative, it all unravels and the Iranian regime takes an even more forceful stand. And there are indications that could happen. I wouldn't be shocked either way. If they come back to the table and try and squeeze the West and get what they want, that would not surprise me either, folks. But the other alternative is Iran walks away and says, we're doing what we want. And then Israel also says, well, now this radical new government could break out any day and have the bomb. And they're clearly, indications are over the past few weeks, judging by the regime's behavior, they're growing more bold and more aggressive and going on the offensive. Look, that drone attack off the coast of Oman 2 weeks ago was a big deal, folks. 2 people were killed. We've had this tit for tat at sea between Israel and the Iranian regime, attacking each other's shipping since February, but no one was killed until 2 weeks ago in that attack off the coast of Oman. 2 crew members killed. The captain, who was a Romanian citizen and also a security guard aboard that ship, that oil tanker, who was a British citizen, which makes that EU representative attending Raisi's inauguration even more risible. An EU citizen was just killed, and then in an act of Iranian terror, and then an EU representative attends Raisi's inauguration. You can't make this stuff up, but that's where we're at today. So if you're looking across the pond, across the Atlantic for some moral clarity and some support in facing down the Iranian axis, you're probably not going to get it, at least not yet in 2021. But Clearly, between that drone attack, which was lethal, between Hezbollah, just not even a week ago, firing 19 rockets into northern Israel. You've got Iran. Hey, remember, Hezbollah is Iran's most powerful, most lethal proxy. The stakes are high. Put it that way. The stakes are high and getting higher. And clearly, Iran is not showing signs that, hey, with the election of Raisi, with this new cabinet, with these terror attacks, they're not showing signs of being, again, conciliatory and wanting to compromise and wanting to talk and negotiate, right? They're showing quite the opposite. They're becoming more aggressive. Now, that could be to gain negotiating leverage where they come to the table and they essentially blackmail the US and the West in Vienna and extort them and say, if you don't give us what we want, we're going to kill a lot of people and cause a lot of trouble. I hate to be so stark in the way I put it, but isn't that the truth? Give us what we want, remove all the sanctions, don't utter a peep about our ballistic missile program, our terror sponsorship, give us money, and then maybe we'll leave you alone. Then maybe we won't arm our proxies to the teeth. Maybe we won't drive out to develop the bomb. Maybe we won't attack U.S. troops in Iraq. Maybe. That's what they're angling for right now. We're keeping a very close eye on it. I'm glad we were able to fill you in. If you're just joining us, we're about 31 minutes in. If you are just joining us, we broke down the new Iranian government that Ebrahim Raisi, that brand new Iranian president, inaugurated last week, the new government that he has hand-selected. And folks, it ain't good. So if you missed the beginning, the first 10, 15 minutes of this newscast, check it out here in our archives. You can watch the whole newscast. We're going till 5 o'clock. We're going for an hour. Real quick, I want to pull up some questions. We're going to Q&A shortly. There's two more quick things I want to share with you before we get to our Q&A. But Daniel sent me a few things along. Hey, do not hesitate to send your questions along, folks. I'm trying to pull up the chat here. For some reason, I cannot see the chat. Let's see here, because I can also glance at your questions most of the time. Right now, I do not see it, but that's okay, because Daniel will send me your questions. Keep them coming. Keep the chat going. I know it's always lively here on our live streams here in the Watchman Newscast. Two more things I want to mention before we get into the Q&A. Number one, the Abraham Accords. August 13th, I mentioned at the top, I believe it was August 13th last year, where the announcement came that Israel had reached a peace agreement with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. We've got some developments on that front. Now, as I mentioned earlier, September 15th is the official one-year anniversary where the deal was signed, but it was announced on August 13th. Let me just lay out right away here on our newscast. There's been concerns expressed by some viewers over the past year about the Abraham Accords. Could it be part of the Antichrist, the 7-year peace treaty? This is not that, folks. This is a positive development where essentially Bahrain, the UAE, Morocco have come alongside Israel. The Sunni Arab nations, also Jordan, Egypt, we've talked about this a bunch. They've come alongside Israel for a number of reasons, but the main reason is Iran. These are nations that are genuinely aligning with Israel in the face of that Iranian threat, because it not only threatens Israel, it threatens the Sunni Arab nations as well, like Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE, Oman. They're all threatened by Iran. They see Israel as the strong horse in the region militarily, and they see Israel with the backbone willing to stand up to Iran. By the way, that Iranian nuclear deal made the Abraham Accords even more possible, because the Sunni Arab nations looked at the United States and said, man, we can't count on the U.S. anymore under Barack Obama. Now, this is essentially a third Obama term under Joe Biden, so you do the math. But we had a 4-year window under President Trump, who was strong with the Iranian regime, and these Abraham Accords happened on his watch, and they are a good thing. There is a genuine warmth and a genuine friendship between Bahrain, the UAE, and Israel right now. It's really amazing to see the interchange between the countries, economic, in every way. There's a genuine warmth going on. A top official from Bahrain is in Israel this week, meeting with Israeli officials, and he said that the Iran nuclear deal was a disaster. Not me, not Western Erick from the United States, not some leader in Britain. No, this is a Sunni Arab leader, a top diplomat in Bahrain, which is right across the Gulf from Iran, saying that Iran nuclear deal accomplished nothing. And he said it while standing in Israel. historic, to say the least, and we're getting the same out of the UAE. So the 1 year anniversary, I think, is pretty amazing. The Abraham Accords it's stuck together, I should say, even after that Gaza war in May. Many were concerned, well, what's going to happen to the Abraham Accords? The UAE and Bahrain stood by Israel. Even through that war. That was a very good indicator. We also have Yair Lapid, the Israeli foreign minister, in Morocco right now, meeting with Moroccan officials. They're also part of the Abraham Accords. Will more countries come into the fold? Tough to say. Saudi Arabia is the big one out there, obviously. I interviewed actually yesterday. If you watch the newscast yesterday, you know Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State Pompeo. I was in D.C. interviewing him yesterday. At the Museum of the Bible, which is an incredible place in Washington, D.C. If you're in America and if you're near Washington, D.C., I highly recommend the Museum of the Bible. It is a great place. But I interviewed Pompeo there, the former Secretary of State. Great guy, great American, loves America and loves the Lord, as he put it. So my kind of guy. But Pompeo said he thinks the Abraham Accords will stick. They'll stay together. He felt like, if only the Trump administration had another 4 years, who knows what could have happened. We would have had, I believe, he didn't say this, but I'm saying it, I believe Saudi Arabia would have also come to the table and joined those Abraham Accords. So things are moving for sure on that end as well, with the Abraham Accords in a positive direction. The Biden White House has criticized the previous administration, President Trump and his team across the board, not surprisingly. But they have been, interestingly, they have not criticized the Abraham Accords. That's interesting. Will they try and pick it back up and run with the momentum again that the Trump administration established? We'll see. I'm not overly optimistic, but hopefully they would. But judging from what I've seen so far from this administration, I won't hold my breath, sadly. Last thing before we get to questions, and we're not getting a lot of questions so far, guys. Hey, send them along. Anything you want to know. Ask me anything. Feel free. One thing I like to do on the live streams, and I really enjoy these, being with you kind of off the cuff for an hour, and it's a conversation, right? It's like a little fireside chat we have here on the Watchman, on the live stream. Like to get your questions. I like to share a little bit from my heart, which I don't always get to do on the newscast, even on the Watchman TV show on TBN, which, if you don't know, and that's one of the reasons I was interviewing Secretary Pompeo yesterday. We have the newscast here on YouTube, but we also have the Watchman TV show every week on TBN, the world's largest Christian TV network, Thursday nights at 10 o'clock, Fridays at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, both prime time slots. That's the best time to catch it. If you love the newscast, you'll love the TV show. We are on the ground in the Middle East, bringing you the inside story every week. Be sure to check that out. Also, I'm hosting a series of 1 hour specials for TBN, and two of them that are coming up are on the rise of China and growing Christian persecution around the world. Two topics I think our viewers from the Watchmen will love. And that's why I interviewed Secretary Pompeo in D.C. yesterday. We talked about the China threat, which is, and we talk Middle East here in the Watchmen, of course, but China's got its hooks in the Middle East as well. A 25-year agreement with the Iranian regime. We talked about that on prior newscast. I mean, China's on the march, and Secretary Pompeo, who knows it intimately, obviously, what's going on there, shared on that. That airs September 13th on TBN, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, that China special. We don't have a date yet for the Christian persecution special, but that is coming up too. So some exciting stuff that we're working on in addition to what we do here on our YouTube channel. But real quick, before we get to the questions, and there's not a bunch yet. Come on, guys. Pick my brain. I'm here for you. Before we do that, hey, I'd like to share a little bit about my walk with the Lord and encourage you. Don't leave. I know you're waiting for the Q&A. I don't want to see a drop off because this is important. We all need encouragement in these perilous times we're living in. They are Bible times. A few weeks ago, I shared with you about when I moved last year. We just marked the 1 year anniversary. My family moved from the D.C. area back home to where we're from in Pennsylvania. It was a major, major decision. That, wow, a lot of prayer, of course, first and foremost, but a lot of deliberating and conversations. And wow, it was a big deal. But trust the Lord was the message. We only have about 15 minutes left here, by the way. Trust the Lord was the message that I delivered to you. You go back, it was, let's see, 2 weeks ago. Was that July? Oh, gosh. July, who knows? July 22nd or something. I don't know. But go back, go back in the newscast. You can check it out in archives. It was our last live stream 2 weeks ago today. It was on a Wednesday. I know that. But I talked about trusting the Lord, and I gave this personal story. I want to do that again today, and I think it'll be of interest to everyone watching. About 5 or 6 years ago, 6 years ago, actually, time flies, was working. I'm going to keep names out of this, but you'll get the message. I was working on a major TV project. I'll just say that. Putting a pilot together, putting a pilot episode together, putting a proposal together to present to different networks. Now, at the time, my kind of the guy I was working alongside with this, he was an editor, videographer, and I was leaning on him, and we were he helped me with the pilot. He helped put it together. And I said, okay, this is going to be my guy. He's got a production company. I'm going to use him. He's going to be the guy. Well, as time went on, it became pretty apparent that he wasn't going to be the guy. We not only did we not line up in terms of what he wanted to be paid, I was just this was a startup, basically, what I was putting together here. And he was a good friend, a guy I'd worked with a lot over the years. And I was pretty upfront. I said, look, I'm not going to be able to afford to pay you a lot at first. We're just getting this thing started. I feel like God has given me a vision for this and put it on my heart. And his attitude was kind of like, okay, I guess I'll help you out. Almost I don't want to say lording it over me, but like he's doing me a favor, basically, and letting me know it, which I didn't quite appreciate. But I said, well, okay. But as we went on, it got more apparent that I probably couldn't, or at least it seemed to me, I probably couldn't give him what he wanted financially, him and his company. Not only that, I'll just say that he was a guy who I felt backsliding in the Lord and not living out his faith and not walking with the Lord anymore from what I saw. And there were some clear indicators to me. And for me, what I'm doing is by God and for God. That's how I put it. That's why I do what I do. I'm on a mission and I do what the Lord wants me to do, and I am not going to dishonor him in any way. I try to walk blamelessly in his sight. I try to walk the walk and be a witness and be a light. And I have to practice what I preach. Not that I'm a preacher, quote unquote, but hey, I profess Jesus. I'm a follower of Jesus. He is my Lord and Savior. He's the way, the truth, and the life. I profess that, and I need to live that out. I need to walk blamelessly in his sight and be worthy of the calling that he's given me. And I hope everyone out there, if you are a Christian, if you're following Jesus, you should feel the same way. We're in the world, but we're not of the world. And I want no parts of what's going on in the culture right now, and it's nasty things. I'm trying to stay true to Jesus. And if I was going to collaborate with someone who was not where I was at spiritually on a spiritual program, spiritual meaning a Christian program, which is preaching Jesus, preaching the truth of the Bible. I shouldn't say preaching, but I guess you would say I report the news from a biblical Christian perspective. That's a better way to put it, because when I say preaching, you picture me at a pulpit, leading a congregation. I don't do that. But I guess in a sense, we have a congregation here at the Watchman, but I think you know what I mean. The mantle God has given me is as a correspondent, a host, a commentator who delivers the news from a biblical perspective, which is sorely needed today. So if I was to get alongside someone who didn't share my worldview and was not walking the walk, it's not going to work. It just would. You can't be unequally yoked, not only in marriage, but in business either. It wasn't going to work. And that became more and more apparent to me. So I had to let him go. And it was not easy. He was a good friend who I'd worked with for years. And I was shocked by his response when I let him go. And he was very upset. And I thought to myself, wow, he acted like he was doing me a favor and I was just like a side client. Maybe that was his negotiating ploy. I don't know. But he was very upset. And I said, look, if maybe we can work together in the future, but I don't think it's going to work out in this project. But here's the deal. That's one part of it. But folks, as I wrap this story up, this is where the encouragement comes in. It was a total leap of faith. Why do I say that? Because this project, which God planted this on my heart. I had been conceiving it, putting it together for over 2 years. Now it had finally come to fruition. I had a big meeting lined up with the head of a major network. I'll just say that. I'm not going to name names. I let this guy go on, I believe, a Friday. The meeting was like the following Thursday. Within a week, I had this meeting. And I was ready to walk into this meeting with these network executives with no team. Hey, I've got this great idea, and here's what I want to do. And they'd say, okay, great. We love the idea. How are you going to put this together? Who's going to produce it, edit it, shoot it? I mean, do you have a team? I had no one. Suddenly, I had no one. Under a week to go until this meeting. And I knew that. And I knew what I was doing. Pre-Jesus, PJ, before I gave my life to the Lord, I'll tell you what, folks, I would have hung on to this guy who I would said, I'm using him. I don't care. I can't let him go. I have this huge meeting in a week. I can't walk into this meeting and say, yeah, here's the idea. By the way, I don't even have a team to put the idea together and make it a reality on your network. They would said, okay, it's a great idea, but come back to us when you're serious. And I knew that was coming. And I'm telling you, in former days, before I was born again and became a new creation in Christ and put my trust in him and him alone, rather than myself, put my trust in him. Imagine that. Finally, it took me 33 years, but I finally did it when I gave my life to the Lord in 2009. But in previous days, I would have said, okay, I'm not going to fire him. I got to keep him. I knew what I was doing. Talk about a leap of faith. And I said to my wife, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I got to let this guy go. I can't go into this meeting with this as my team. It's not going to work. And, I've heard someone said that if God is in it, you could have a minuscule budget, a small team. But if God's in it, it's going to work because he'll make it work. But if God's not in it, you could have a massive budget, a massive team, and man, it's going to collapse. It's not going to work. And I learned that early on with this project I was working on. So I said, okay, God, I got to let this guy go. I felt convicted. I can't do business with this guy. I mean, God bless him, but I got to let him go. And I felt the Holy Spirit was convicting me. Don't move forward in this project that I have given you, Erick, unequally yoked. Let him go. Looked ahead to this meeting and said, uh-oh, what am I going to do? So a dear friend of mine who I also had worked with for years, he didn't know. I kept this project under wraps. No one knew, but I shared with a friend. This was a few days later, right before the meeting, 2 days before the meeting, shared it with him. And this is a guy, by the way, who had exactly the kind of skills I needed. Before I could even ask him, he said, I'd love to be a part of it. Isn't that something? I'd love to be a part of it. Oh, by the way, I have another guy who I knew as well. He'd also love to be a part of it. We'd love to be your team and help you get this off the ground. And these guys were both rock solid, walking with the Lord. Answer to prayer. God honors obedience. God is faithful. I obeyed. I knew it was, I was convicted. You know the feeling when the Holy Spirit's telling you, don't go in there. Don't go another step further. And I knew what I had to do. In previous times, before I was born again, I would have fought God. Even then, God, I know for sure God was trying to speak to me then, speak to my heart, not audibly, Erick, drop him, nothing like that. Speaking to my heart, that still small voice, and just convicting me and just giving me a restlessness is the best way I can describe it. Before I would have said, you know what, I'm marching forward anyway with this guy. But I made the move. I let him go. And God put the perfect match at that time in my path. Went into that meeting. Here's my idea. And here's my team. Boom, boom, boom. We're ready to get this thing started. What do you think? And it all worked out. So amazing. I want to encourage you. I felt kind of just compelled to share that story with you because I think we are at a crossroads, clearly in the world, in the country. We're in the days where we're all looking up. And I think there's a lot of opportunities presented right now. People are moving around geographically, employment-wise. I'm talking to so many people just moving around the country, moving from job to job. And there's a lot of hesitation. And what if this happens? God, is this what you want? If you're a believer, you say, God, is this what you want me to do? And at times, God is requiring us to take a leap of faith and put complete trust in him. I guarantee there's among the thousands of people that are watching us right now that there are certainly people who are in that precise situation. I talked about it 2 weeks ago in the live stream. I was in the same situation, moving to a different state with 2 young daughters. Whoa, this is a big deal. And we did it. God blessed it. It's worked out wonderfully. I made the move. I had to let this guy go, and God supplied the need. He always equips you for the task that he has set before you. I've learned that. If God gives you something to do, if he gives you an assignment, he will always make sure you have everything you need in your toolbox to accomplish what he's given you to do. So I made the move. I obeyed the prompting of the Holy Spirit, let the guy go, hired a new team 2 days before the meeting, and the rest is history. It all worked out beautifully in that instance as well. And I just want to encourage you, if you're at that crossroads moment right now, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and I guarantee he will make your paths straight. Proverbs 3:5, one of my favorite verses, a life verse for me. So it's going to work out, because if you're following Jesus, if you are earnestly seeking the Lord in prayer on these big decisions you have to make, he will work all things together for your good, because you love him and you're called according to his purpose. His word is very clear. At the end of the day, you can't lose if you do that. There's some encouragement. I went a little longer with my commentary, I guess you would say, because we didn't get a whole lot of questions today, but we've got a few that we will close out with in the remaining, what do we have, about 7 minutes, I think, because I started about 2 minutes late. So let's go to 5:02 rather than 5 o'clock. Okay. This is a good one. Charles asks, hey, Eric, outside of your reporting, what do you enjoy doing for recreation? My favorite activities are fly fishing and backpacking. Man, Charles, this is so funny you say that. Great question, by the way. This is funny that you say that, because I'm not a big camping outdoorsy guy. I love being outdoors, but I'm not the kind who's going to go camping and be in a tent all weekend. I'm a city guy originally. I'm a Philly guy. So I'm a city slicker in a lot of respects. I love nature. I love being out in God's creation for sure. But I'm more the guy who's laying on the beach and reading a good book. That's me. But it's funny because my daughter just went to a Bible camp up in the mountains not too long ago this summer, and we took her up there. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. But I said to my wife, we were driving back, I said, I'm more of a beach guy than a mountains guy for sure, but I love the mountains. And I have to say, when I'm in Israel, they are some of the most, I don't want to use the word outdoorsy, because like I said, I hate being indoors. On a sunny day, get me out. I want to be outside enjoying the fresh air. But Israel, man, they're hikers, campers, fishers. Charles, you'd love it over there. They really, really are big time into that. What I like to do for recreation, I like to work out, probably a cliched answer, not so much for appearance, to be honest with you, although it doesn't hurt on TV to keep a few pounds off, but for my health, not only my physical health, but for my mental health. I find that a good walk or a good jog really clears my head. I don't know if anyone out there can relate to that, but man, I love just on a nice sunny day, getting out there in the fresh air, jog, or I was an athlete, so I'm so used to being active. I was a basketball player. I played in college, played my whole life. So it was a pretty serious athlete for sure. And I just always liked, I love the competition, the camaraderie. I really miss it playing basketball. I coach my daughter now, but I miss playing. But I'm a guy who likes to stay active. So for leisure time, I really like to do that. Not every day, but a few times a week, I'll work out, just get the blood flowing, clear my head. And I have to say, when I lift a little weights, but when I do cardio, some of my best thoughts, sometimes I'll say, man, I wish I had a pen with me, but I have my phone with me. And I'll jot down just some thoughts for future scripts or book ideas or show ideas. So I like to do that. I love to read. I'm a voracious reader. I also love to spend time with my family. Those are the top activity of all is spending time with my family, doing all sorts of stuff, mini golf, bowling, whatever, going to the movies. Family time is my thing for sure. That is my main recreation activity for sure. So, and reading, I wish, I see people all the time. I'm on the airplane and they're reading like these gossip magazines. I just shake my head and say, man, get a good book. My dad was a working class guy. He worked in a factory. He was an electrician, but he was intellectually curious. He was well read. Man, I feel like we're losing that a little bit today as people are just addicted to their phones and, stuff that I think is nonsense. A lot of the things we're into these days. A few minutes left. Still not a lot of questions here, but let's see. What are the chances that Carl James asked, what are the chances that Russia, China, or North Korea would one day stand and align with Iran for a quest to go nuclear? Which is interesting, he says, because for years, North Korea was under the same watchful eye that Iran is under. And now they're kind of silent all of a sudden. That's a good point. Good question by Carl. A few things here. Number one, Russia and China have been squarely in Iran's corner throughout this whole nuclear crisis for sure. And North Korea has helped supply Iran with technology. Look, certainly ballistic missile technology. And look, their goal is to eventually mount a nuclear warhead on a missile. That's Iran's goal, on intercontinental ballistic missiles, which we know they're working on today. But over the past 2 decades, we have seen Iranian scientists visit North Korea and sit in on North Korean nuclear tests. That's a fact. So we know that. So we know there's a real synergy between North Korea and Iran. And are you telling me that North Korea, the rogue regime of all rogue regimes, would not supply Iran with nuclear technology for the right price and perhaps for some cheap oil, which Iran can certainly provide? For sure. So the North Korea connection is very, very troubling in that regard on the nuclear front. They would certainly be in support of Iran having the bomb. Russia and China aligned with Iran. I just did an interview about this yesterday, actually. Aligned with Iran, first and foremost, because Iran is anti-West. Russia and China, they align with each other. They align with Iran, not because there's a real ideological affinity that they agree on the same things. Look, Iran is a radical Islamic regime. Russia's an authoritarian regime, but not Islamic. China is an atheistic communist regime. So there's big ideological differences, but what do they have in common? They all despise the West and see the West and the U.S. in particular as their adversary. So you have some strange bedfellows. Russia, China, Iran aligned, and Russia and China have consistently protected the Iranian regime in these ongoing nuclear negotiations and at the UN Security Council and elsewhere. So, Carl, what you asked has pretty much come to fruition already. China, Russia, and North Korea are, in a sense, aligned with Iran. And I believe China and Russia, I don't know that they'd be doing cartwheels about Iran getting the bomb, but I think China and Russia would feel that, hey, they're a friend of convenience, at least. It doesn't threaten us. What do we care? I think that would be China and Russia's view, and North Korea as well. They're not going to aim it at us. What do we care? I wouldn't be so sure about that in the long term, but that seems to be the way they're looking at it. If Iran broke out and went nuclear, I think Russia, China, and North Korea, they might even say, well, they might issue some kind of public statement saying, well, we need to be very careful here, Iran. But behind the scenes, they're loving it in that it not only infuriates, it makes the West, the word I would use, uneasy, very uneasy to say the least. So that is a good question. You have on one side that, as we close, I kept my word. I went to 2 or 3 extra minutes here because we started at 4:03. So we're going to close at 5:03. But the Iranian axis, Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Assad regime in Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq. And then you have Erdogan in Turkey, cooperating with that axis here and there, but oftentimes operating on his own as well. But that axis is aligned with Venezuela, North Korea, China, Russia. There's all sorts of connections there among these bad actors in the Middle East and beyond around the world. So that's what you have right now. Perilous times, but again, Bible times. It was great having you with us today. We're going to end right at the 1 hour mark. This is great. More questions next time. I didn't leave as much time for questions because we didn't have that many this week. So that's why I only got to 2 or 3. God bless you all. We'll be back on the newscast tomorrow with one that you won't want to miss. Former Israeli National Security Advisor, incredible interview in Jerusalem. Until then, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Take care.